This is Shinobi Bench. Today I'm going to talk about why volume matters more than intensity for building a bigger bench press. When you watch bench press videos, you often hear people say that it is important to secure intensity by training in the heavy 1-2-3 rep range. Or you may often hear that in every workout, in every set, it is important to push yourself to the absolute limit. This theory is correct. To increase your 1 rep max, performing high intensity single reps is important, and building sets around an intensity of about 3 reps is effective. Also, pushing the limit allows you to break through your own boundaries. However, there is one trap hidden here, and if you do not notice it, your numbers will not increase easily. Now then, in training, the principle of progressive overload is important. The principle of progressive overload is a fundamental principle for promoting strength and hypertrophy. By gradually increasing the load compared to the previous training session, the muscles adapt and grow. Load increases weight, reps, sets, rest intervals, TUT, time under tension, frequency, and so on. It is important to increase this little by little. Many opinions that recommend low rep sets of 1-3 reps increase intensity, but in exchange, total training volume becomes smaller. So, you could also say it as sacrifice volume in order to take intensity. However, I believe that for many beginners to intermediate trainees up to around 120 kilograms, volume is more important than intensity. In other words, it means maximizing weight times reps times sets. Rather than pushing to the limit, I place emphasis on performing a large number of sets. This is because the principle that quantity transforms into quality works, what is often called the quantity to quality conversion principle. I believe that simply putting in the work is the path to growth. Next, I will talk about how whether intensity is important or volume is important changes depending on what phase the trainee is currently in. There are several approaches to increasing load, and whether to prioritize intensity or volume depends on the trainee's phase. For beginners, men under 80 kilograms, novice lifters, men under 100 kilograms, and intermediate lifters, men under 120 kilograms, volume is more important than intensity. There are 3 reasons. The first is risk of injury. Because beginners and intermediate trainees do not yet have perfect form, high-intensity training carries a higher risk of injury. The second is that practice volume increases. With greater volume, you get more practice, and form acquisition becomes faster. In the bench press, the completeness of form directly affects the weight you can lift. So repeated practice improves technique. Just like in any sports, acquiring correct form first is important. To acquire correct form, you need practice volume, and high volume training results in a greater number of reps and sets, which increases practice volume. I do not count this as training volume, but in terms of practicing form, even just practicing form every day with an empty 20 kilograms bar is meaningful enough for beginners. The third is that volume equals hypertrophy. Compared to doing fewer reps at high intensity, performing more reps at low intensity is more effective for muscle growth. According to the current consensus, research-based evidence indicates that the biggest factor for hypertrophy is volume. I also feel that this is true based on experience. Of course, to improve your 1 rep max in the bench press, improving strength is essential. However, up to a certain level, strength is proportional to muscle mass. If the muscle is bigger, strength is also higher. This theory does not hold true beyond a certain weight, but at least up to around a 120 kilograms bench press, it is fine to prioritize hypertrophy. For the reasons above, from beginners to intermediate trainees, I recommend training that prioritizes volume rather than training that prioritizes intensity. Of course, it is not that you should increase volume infinitely. Fatigue management is important. At first, start with a small number of sets and gradually increase the number of sets. As a guideline, in the early stage of training, around 10 sets per week and then increase by 1 set each month. This is also based on the principle of progressive overload, gradually increasing the load little by little. Also, when I talk about this, some people say, then if I do 1000 reps with 20 kilograms, the total volume becomes 20,000 kilograms, so I'll get stronger at the bench press. However, in general, volume should only be counted for weights that can be considered main sets. As a rough standard, you can think of it as 60% of 1 RM or more. Next, I will talk about the risks of pushing too hard. If you push too hard, your form breaks down and the risk of injury increases. Especially for beginners and intermediate trainees, training with correct form is the top priority. For beginners to intermediate trainees, the most common cause of stalled progress in bench press weight is not being able to bench press due to injury. Avoiding injury is the best way to keep increasing your numbers without plateauing. From that perspective as well, pushing to the limit once a week or once every 2 weeks is enough. To achieve a pushing frequency of once a week or once every 2 weeks, it is important not to train without a plan, but to train in a planned, mechanical way. But setting rules such as if you clear today's sets at plus 2.5 kilograms next time, or if you hit a limit, reduce by minus 10 kilograms, and mechanically increasing the weight, you can perform pushing workouts periodically. Rather than placing importance on how hard you pushed in that day's training, check your progress on a weekly or monthly basis. Finally, something extremely important. When you watch YouTube or SNS, pay attention to what level the person is, who they are speaking to. In most cases, increasing volume does not have much meaning when the person is an advanced lifter who has many years of training experience and whose form is already perfected. Even those who now train with low reps and high intensity often have a high volume period at some point early in their training, meaning a period when they simply train a lot. This suggests that for beginners to intermediate trainees, higher volume leads to fewer injuries and earlier progress, and that once you become advanced, intensity and pushing might become the key to growth. For beginners and intermediate trainees, volume remains an important factor, and for advanced lifters, it may be important to prioritize intensity even at the expense of volume. This is the logic, isn't it? I have talked this far, but training has large individual differences, and it is important to find a method that suits you. However, for many beginners and intermediate trainees, I think prioritizing volume over intensity is effective. This is because increasing volume can be expected to help with acquiring form, preventing injuries, and promoting hypertrophy. High-intensity, low-volume training may be effective for advanced lifters, but for beginners and intermediate trainees, it comes with risks. To maximize training results, it is important to maintain appropriate volume while following the principle of progressive workload. On this channel, I upload various videos that help you get stronger at the bench press, so if you're interested, please come check out the channel. If you think this might be helpful, please subscribe to the channel. Let's keep working on the bench press. See you next time.